Hello and welcome back to episode 7 of An Intelligent Discussion. I'm Ben, you're here with Justin and Will. We're tackling a controversial subject today. Will, you want to fill them in?
Today we are going to be talking about the Second Amendment, and more specifically than that, we're going to be discussing our opinions on that amendment. Now, we all generally agree that the Second Amendment is a good thing, but beyond that, all of us vary on the specifics. So that's what we're hoping to discuss today and kind of scope out how we view this amendment and how it affects the world that we live in.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, do you want to add anything to that?
Not on that specifically. No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so obviously the Second Amendment is one of like the hot talking points for the majority of the American public. You know, it's right up there with other societal no-nos as, like abortion rights, things like that, like this highly contested issue that is incredibly divisive. Why do you guys think it's that divisive?
Okay.
Divisive.
Whatever.
Thank you, Will.
Unlike Will, I don't have a college degree, so we're going to let it go.
I don't have one yet, but I will soon. Very soon.
There we go. I love it. All right. Divisive?
Divisive.
All right. Divisive. Device. All right. Why do you guys think it's so divisive?
Well, the Second Amendment, when it was ratified, gave people the right to bear arms. And the intent of this amendment was to give the people the chance to overthrow a tyrannical government if and when they saw fit. And now that we have things like the internet and the electricity, a lot of people are raising a lot of controversy whether or not we should adhere to laws that originated from a time period where the technology that we have every day would be indistinguishable from magic to the people who wrote these laws. So whether or not they are valid in today's society is the bone of contention between specifically conservatives and liberals.
Yeah,
Justin, would you agree with that?
I think I would definitely agree with that. I think there's something to be said about it's definitely a different time period now than it was back then. So obviously interpretations are going to vary now. And even if your interpretation isn't varying, I think, at least in my eyes, it's safe to say, at least for me, I do not view the Second Amendment as in place in 2021, almost 2022 now. I don't view that as being in place to overthrow a tyrannical government. I think if you are the type of person in the modern era that feels like it's your right to bear arms in case the state comes after you, I don't want to say it's a little silly because everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but I just think that's not something that you necessarily need to worry about. I think obviously at the time that this amendment was ratified, it makes sense. The nation was born out of rebelling against Great Britain. Like they fought for their own freedom. They broke away from an empire. So obviously they have, very uncertain feelings about how the nation's going to survive, if it's going to survive, how they're going to protect it. So of course they put that in the hands of the citizens.
Ben?
I think what you guys have kind of initially outlaid is really interesting. And I think before we go any further in that direction, we should really kind of establish where on the spectrum we are as it relates to the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. And so I'll go first. I would wager that of the three of us, I'm the biggest proponent of the Second Amendment because I'm always rocking these guns.
Yeah.
No, but I think there's a lot to unpack as far as like, especially Justin, what you were saying, like, does this have a place in 2021? Now, segueing into 2022, does this law that was written, over 200 years ago bear precedent in modern times? That's certainly a discussion worth having, but it's also a discussion that requires a little bit of background. And so for me, like, I don't believe that any sort of gun restriction should exist. I think if you are a, healthy, mentally and, physically well individual and an American citizen, you have the right to bear arms. And I don't see a very solid reason for restricting that. Changed my mind. That's where I'm at.
Oh, well, are we just outlining how we're feeling?
Yeah, I mean, this was my goal was to just basically get at least a hey, this is where we are as far as what we think of the Second Amendment.
Well, go ahead, Will. Tell us where you land on the spectrum.
Well, Ben, you already restricted yourself in your opening statement. You,
What do
you
you mean?
specified that you have to be a mentally fit individual, which in itself is a restriction.
Mhm.
Sure. I can go very in depth as to why I have that in my specific definition. I'm going to do so after you guys give me a.
Justin, why don't you go next?
Okay, so where I land on the spectrum, I think we won't be able to ping who's where until all three of us go. But for me, I interpret the Second Amendment as, just literally as it's written. The citizen's right to bear arms. I view it as, it's my right being an American that I can concealed carry, I own a firearm to defend my home, that sort of thing. When I want to clarify that when I mentioned earlier, I do not think in this day and age, at least for me, that the Second Amendment really matters in terms of like defending myself from a tyrannical government, only because I don't foresee that happening. That's not to say that if for whatever reason some weird scenario pops up where America becomes a dictatorship and we are required to fight back, I'm glad that I do have a firearm so I can do so. But that's not something that I actively worry about. It's not something that I think about when I'm looking at buying another gun or doing whatever. I interpret it as just like, if you're an American and like Ben said, you're mentally sound, you're not buying it for the wrong reasons. You just want to defend your family or your law enforcement or military or X one of those, then you should have a right to, purchase a firearm and, keep that in your home, keep your family safe. I don't necessarily know if normal citizens really need their hands on like fully automatic weapons or like military gear, even some elevated things that Leos have access to. I think a lot of that gets loopholed into citizen hands because, the right to bear arms, like which arms. So I think a lot of times people end up with things that they don't need. Don't get me wrong, man. I would love to shoot an MG42 or somebody's full auto M4 or something like that. But I don't necessarily know if a ordinary citizen who just has an affinity for guns should really be buying some kind of full auto LMG or something like that.
This is something that I've thought a lot about in my spare time. I was raised around firearms. My dad taught me to shoot at a very, well, not a very young age, single digits. And when, back in the 18th century, when we came out with the Second Amendment, the epitome of infantry weaponry was a flintlock muzzle loader. And the best military in the world could fire, what was it, like 2 shots a minute?
Mm-hmm.
And the people could own those guns, but so could the government and the government's military. Today, the government has tanks and drones and an air force. And, maybe an automatic weapon is the least that they could give us. If the people did decide to rise up against the government, and we're going to be going up against armored divisions and drone strikes, I think I've made my
This
point.
is the most beautiful American thing I've ever
He said,
heard.
do us all a favor.
However,
Give us a crumb, please.
However, I will say this. The Second Amendment is a core tenet to the American identity. Americans love guns. And for that aspect alone, I think it's enough to keep it enforced. Let everybody, have, shotguns and pistols, single shot rifles and all that. But beyond that, I think we should let the states decide on things like open carry, concealed carry, magazine size. Leave that up to the states. But if American citizens are allowed to bear arms, then by all means, let them bear arms and let the states deal out on the specifics.
Yeah, I am with that. I just want to jump in real quickly and say, by no means at any point in this podcast will I advocate for the abolishment of the Second Amendment, because that's not my feelings by any means. And I think, Will, you're right. It is something that, is truly and utterly like American. It's something that formulates part of our values, whether you hate guns or love them, or whether you believe in the Second Amendment or don't. Your cultural views have been shaped by the Second Amendment in some way, shape, or form.
Excuse me. 100%. I mean, I think it is truly ubiquitous with the American, character. Like it's something that separated America from every other country when it happened. The idea of monarchies in Europe allowing their citizens to own independent firearms, independent of government is like, and even today, like, people in different countries look at us and they're like, I can't believe you're allowed to do that or have that. Or like, in our country, we're only allowed to have that at like state regulated facilities and we have to lock it up. Like there's so many different examples. And I think it's really important that we all really remember, like, when this law was written back in the 18th century, like truly nothing else existed like this. And so I think that difference allowed America to experience growth and just change in ways that other places could not. So it's really interesting from a historical perspective.
Have you guys seen the show 1883 that just recently came out?
No.
Okay, well, it's a precursor to Yellowstone if you're a Yellowstone fan. Fantastic show. Anyways, 1883 is shaping up to be pretty good. But Ben, what you're saying, there's an extremely interesting scene where two characters who are sheriffs in Fort Worth, Texas, agree to guide a group of Germans, like a group of, a couple hundred Germans, like west towards Oregon. And he's like, where are your guns? Because they're looking at all their luggage that they're going to take with them on this trek from Texas. And it's like, where are your guns? And they're like, guns? We don't own any guns. And they were like, we've never been allowed to own guns, like ever, definitely not in Germany. And he's like, how do you defend yourself? And it's just like this complete fundamental, like, you walk around without a gun like all day. And that's just another thing, in America, it's almost viewed as like an extension of yourself or just a tool. I think that's what a lot of people don't understand is a gun is not going to do anything without someone pulling the trigger, honestly. It straight up is a tool. What kind of tool that is? I mean, whether it's a hunting tool, a killing tool, you're not going to go start a fire with it. But I'm using the word tool very loosely. But quite literally, it needs to be an operator for it.
I want to add something to what Justin says. I agree. I agree with him. Guns do not kill people. People kill people. If guns kill people, then spoons make people fat.
I love that argument.
All
right. So what I want to say is what I would consider my first real job was in the firearms industry. And I actually was able to work in the industry under the age of 7. I was 17. And so even when I couldn't legally own a firearm independently of my parents, I was able and surrounded in this culture, in this this industry. Firearm manufacturing and sales is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. There's 120 guns per 100 people in the United States. So they out there. There's a lot of them, and it's such an interesting thing because even prepping for this episode, like I was pouring through like gun control statistics and gun control, like just even if you go into this like Second Amendment, like if you look it up and it's like guns, immediate polarization, either good or bad. And then the first thing I clicked on was a hospital link about all these different gun statistics and deaths, and it's like, does that actually have anything to do with the Second Amendment, or is this the trepidation of an argument going in a direction it's not meant to be? And so what I really, in a long roundabout way, I'm trying to say is the current perception of the Second Amendment, I don't believe is at all close to what the original founding fathers intended. Mm-hmm. But I also don't think our society would exist today without that Second Amendment, allowing our citizens, in centuries previous to explore and, fight one another and fight others to, secure what they now have. It's an unpopular opinion because, those tools are used for conquest, for death, for, defense. Like there's good and bad uses for these things, but you can't have what we have today without it.
I think it's interesting when you say that we have used guns to secure what is ours, Ben, because that has a lot to do with like my personal interpretation is I own a firearm strictly for, well, I don't want to say strictly, but like really the main logical reasoning behind me owning a gun right now is for home defense. And I'm not saying that it's like super likely that someone's going to try to break into my home. I find that highly unlikely, but I mean, that's why you have it. You don't have it to use it. You have it on the 0.0001% chance somebody breaks in. You're not caught with your pants down. And I think that's what, at least in my eyes, aligns a lot with like initial American values before we were even America, when we came over from Britain. And unlike other colonies, Britain said, you know, hey, it's not like Spain, it's not like France where you can't own firearms. We're actually saying bring a firearm with you. Okay. And when you have your homestead, not only are you allowed to own your firearm, use it. Go ahead and use it, buddy. Like, use it to defend what is your land, so that they didn't have to spend time policing America themselves. They had English settlers and other European settlers coming over and defending their own land with their own guns. And I think at least that part has translated all the way from the 18th century to 2021 for me.
I do not own any firearms, and I do not have the necessary identification in the state of Illinois to purchase one either. But if I did consider buying a firearm, it would be for fun. I do not feel the need to have a firearm to protect myself. Only once in my life did I sit down with my dad and discuss like bringing out our guns preemptively in self-defense. You guys remember the riots in 2020 when COVID was really bad? There were we were reading how close there were looters driving on a country road a few miles from our house, and we had to sit and talk about whether or not we were going to sit out in our driveway with our guns and, you know, hope to deter them. Pray to God we didn't have to use them. We kept them inside. We ended up not, but we did sit out just to wait and see what was going to happen. But that was the only time where I was grateful that we had the option to do that. But now here living on my own, I feel safe. I'm not threatened. And if I was going to buy a gun, it'd be for fun, because I like guns and shooting them is exhilarating. And it's, you know, anybody who's fired a gun knows how it makes you feel.
It's therapeutic, man.
Very much so. I'll say a couple of things. Again, being in the firearm industry through my college experience, it was very strange for me being in such a traditionally liberal area to, you know, be a publicly, you know, voicing Second Amendment supporter. I had everything from very disrespectful conversations to very curious conversations to very respectful conversations. But I also had people that came up to me and they were like, how can you believe this? This is evil. Like, these things are horrible. I was like, okay, but like, have you ever seen one in person? Have you ever held one? Have you ever shot one? Like, have you ever done anything with one? They were like, no. And I ended up taking probably close to 40 or 50 people in my college career to the shooting range and showing them, hey, these are all the rules. These are the ways to do this safely, correctly, securely. It's fun. Like, I had a guy who lives in the Netherlands fly back. Like, he was an ISU transfer student. He flew to the Netherlands. He flew back and he hit me up. He's like, Ben, I'm back in town. Take me to the gun range. And we had a blast. Like, you know, but like, he only had 40 hours in the US. And he's like, we're going to the gun range, like priority. Like, I was like, okay. It's such an interesting experience. And it truly is therapeutic. Like, it's men's yoga is what I want to describe it as.
I don't disagree.
The other thing I wanted to add, when you were talking about the British allowing their colonists to have arms, like, that was so important, because when the British armies came, you know, the British army stayed in the houses of colonists, whether they were British supporters or not. And it's a hell of a lot of a different conversation when you knock on someone's door and saying, hey, we're going to, you know, you're going to put up 5 of our buddies indefinitely. And if the man walks to the door with, you know, a musket or, you know, an early version of a shotgun and said, no, actually, you will not be staying here passively, you know, is that confrontation worth somebody's life? It changes the power dynamic in a very interesting way. And that's definitely something I want to expound on a little bit, is what does it mean when the population has the same firepower capabilities as law enforcement for the most part? Obviously, LEOs do have access to things that civilians typically do not. But on a broad scale, you know, I have nicer equipment than a lot of law enforcement officers that I know. Does that change the social dynamic?
I would say no, not really.
Maybe in certain scenarios.
Because, Ben, are you comfortable telling the audience how many firearms you own? Okay, so despite the fact that you have your property.
Let's call it a healthy assortment.
Your healthy assortment of guns. You can only use one, and if you're incredibly skilled and dexterous, two at any given point in time, and the rest of them are going to sit unused. Unless you get a posse together, and then you have a small army, but that's a whole different aspect. Didn't hear any of that.
Oh, damn. Okay, well, never mind. It's fine. Probably for the best. No, I mean, you're exactly right. There's reasons beyond just like self-defense and utility that I have more than, two firearms. Like, some serve different purposes. Some are truly just for fun, whether it's long distance shooting, whether it's for hunting, whether it's for target practice. It's true. You can only use at best two at one time, but you're going to be most effective with a tool that you train with repetitively. And so, like you brought this up earlier, Will, Illinois has restrictions and requirements that other states do not. As a now Virginia citizen, I do not need a license to get a firearm. In Illinois, you have to have what's called a FOID card, or a firearm owner identification. To get that, you have to pass a background check by the state police and, fill out some forms. I also had and a mental health check. I also have an Illinois concealed carry license. And for that, I had to take a 16-hour course, pass a certification test as far as weapon proficiency, and a written test to make sure that, I am adept enough to be in that position, because it does change your social situation if you have a firearm on you, especially if it's concealed. It's a responsibility that nobody else around you has that you're aware of. Go ahead, Justin.
I was just going to say, I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but I don't think you should be carrying unless it is concealed. I don't see the point of open carrying. I feel like if you're open carrying, you're just doing it to tell everyone you have a gun, which might actually the entire.
Sorry.
Continue.
It's not a lot like bullets.
It was my.
I feel like the whole point of carrying in public, or in a public, even a semi-public situation, is to have it be concealed, because you don't want to have to use it, so you don't want anyone to know you have it, so that you can use it effectively and as quickly as possible. If you're open carrying, you're just, I don't want to say you're asking for trouble, but you are advertising. Like, if you want to have a conversation, like, we can talk about it. Like, you're letting everyone know, like, oh, okay, like, you want to get after it? Yeah, we can get to it. Like, I just don't think that's.
And they had a gunfight in the dirt streets.
Yeah, I disagree.
Oh,
hot take. Here we go.
I believe that open carry is protected by freedom of expression, and it is
the liberals do not like this message.
Deterrent. It does not invite trouble. It deters trouble. Because if you have the kahunas to walk into Walmart with an AR-15 strapped to your back, chances are people aren't going to mess with you, because there's only one type of person that does that, and that's somebody who spent their entire lives around guns. Or it's somebody who just turned 21 and is so excited to buy a firearm that they did that, and they have no idea what they're doing, and they are therefore just as dangerous.
Dude, I don't know, Ben. I don't mean to cut you off, but Will, this is a hot take, because now I'm invested, dude. If you walk into Walmart with an AR-15 on your back, like, and you're not there to use it, like, you're just there to, like, say, like, yo, I got my AR-15 on my back, like, you are a douche. I'm sorry, like, you are a huge douche. I don't know why you would do that. You are asking for trouble. I don't think you're deterring, like. No one would open carry in a Walmart unless they were under the impression that they were like, I'm going in here for trouble. Like, hell yeah. Like, why would you do that?
Who knows? I'm not that type of guy, but that's what it looks like to me.
Here's what I'm going to say. As someone who has taken multiple courses on gun safety, on gun handling, on, competition shooting, on, I've trained with police forces and SWAT teams. Like, I've gotten to do live fire drills, simunitions. Like, I'm not a firearms expert by any means. There are far more qualified people out there than I am. But to the regular riffraff of the public, I may have a level of expertise not many people do. I am personally of the opinion that open carry is a right, and I will fight to defend that right for people. But it is a right that should be exercised with very large amounts of caution and forethought. I agree. In many, like if you're walking into Walmart with an AR-15 on your back, like why? Like just stop and ask yourself why you're doing that. If you're out on your property or you're out hunting, the ability and the right to open carry is a benefit to you because you don't have to have your rifle in a sling. You don't have to have it in a rifle sock or whatever you want to call it. Like you're able to have that ready. If you're in a rural area, you are able to just walk with the gun out. That's fine. But why would you walk into a very populated area not fully brandishing, but letting everyone know that you have a rifle on you? Maybe you are a douche, or maybe it is your constitutional right, and I'll defend that. But if it's on your back, it's more likely to get taken from you than be used by you. And now you have provided someone else with a weapon they would not have.
I agree with Ben. I think it's your right. I mean, I guess I agree with both of you. I think it's your right. I think you should have the right to do it. But that's different than whether or not being able to do it is a smart thing. Like, I don't think any sort of actual individual from the military or any Leo or anybody with any bit of tactical training is going to do that sort of thing, because Ben's correct. It could get taken off your back. It could make you an open target or more of a target before. From a tactical standpoint, it just makes zero sense.
100%.
For lack of a better term, it puts a target on your back,
No, it does. If you are concealed carrying, it's your responsibility. You have a greater level of responsibility than those around you, because you now have a weapon that, if taken from you, is a danger to other people, not just yourself. And so, if I'm in a gas station and somebody comes in with nefarious intent, I have to make the judgment call of whether or not I brandish a firearm and engage in that situation, or just let it go by. But if I have an AR-15 on my back and somebody walks into a gas station with a gun and he looks at me, is he more likely to assert violence or, anything towards somebody that's clearly armed, or someone that's wearing, a gun concealed that they have no idea?
That's it right there.
I mean, it's just, and perhaps being openly carrying allows you to access your weapon faster, but there's a gentleman named Jerry Michalak that's proved that, it's less than a quarter of a second difference between him being concealed and open carrying that he can access and engage a target.
In a firefight, a quarter of a second can mean life or death.
No kidding.
Absolutely. But would they be focusing on you for the extra quarter of a second if they just see, in his case, a 65-year-old man?
Right. I would argue wholeheartedly that the good guy with a gun argument hinges on concealed versus open carry. If you are trying to argue that, some guy walks into the grocery store and he decides that he wants to shoot it up, but you're like, oh, well, there's a good guy with a gun in there. If the good guy with a gun is just wearing his Glock on his hip, this guy's just going to target him. And then what happened to your good guy with a gun? Now he's dead guy with a gun. But
now there's an extra gun in the field.
Exactly. If it's concealed, you might, even if you're not Jerry Michalak and, you don't need a quarter of a second. If it's concealed and he's not going to pick you first, you might get 5 extra seconds, which in a deadly situation like that, that's a lifetime.
100%.
Now, in this scenario, is this a state where, assuming like in this scenario, this is a state where open carry is allowed. So why are we assuming that there was only one person carrying a firearm in this scenario? Wouldn't there be more than one person in that Walmart, especially Walmart, with an AR-15 on their back?
Okay, definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
But then again, someone's probably not going to walk up in there and try to shoot it up if it's that sort of state.
Right. Well, and so one thing I do want to add is there's a lot of like almost misconceptions with this. Open carry is legal by county in a large majority of the state, or excuse me, the nation. Even states that are, like the countries, like the whole country, like even California and almost all rural areas, open carry is fully legal.
Which that makes sense.
100%.
California?
Yeah, dude, 100. Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that wild? Like, you think of it, and people think of Illinois. Illinois is potentially one of the most restrictive gun right states. But we look at California and we're like, all right, but we're not those people. But even in California, like open carry is legal. Now, on the flip side of that, like, it blows my mind because in Virginia, open carry is legal, and I've seen people just walking around with like a gun on their hip, or I saw somebody with like a 44 Magnum in like a leather holster, like cowboy style, and I was like, it's kind of cool.
Yeah. I want to clarify as well for everyone listening who heard me say, well, that makes sense when you said open carry is practically allowed in the whole country. And they're like, what the hell is he talking about? I don't mean it makes sense that open carry is legal in most of the country. I mean, it does technically because it's your right. But it makes sense from a regulator standpoint, because if you're going to have one thing be legal everywhere, open or concealed, you want it to be open for the same reasons we just talked about. Because if open is legal, people are going to be like, okay, well, I won't get in trouble if I open carry. And then everyone who needs to know, like undercover cops, in clothes or in uniform Leos, like off-duty military, like if someone's carrying, you most likely want to know so that if they're going to cause trouble, you know who to target. Whereas if
100%.
concealed carry was legal, it would literally be the Wild West.
So, have you guys seen the video? There's a alcohol shop in Texas, and they're doing like a wine bottle decorking or like a champagne bottle decorking. And there's just like, you get 4 security cameras giving you like a full circle view of this room. And the champagne bottle like explodes and it makes a super loud noise, kind of like a gunshot. Like 8 of the 10 people in here like hit the deck and grab a gun from a concealed position and start looking around. And it's like, but it's a humorous video, and it's actually it's portrayed on YouTube. You can look it up. Like look up, I think it's Texas like liquor store, whatever. You'll find it very quickly. But it really cements the idea of the concealed carry argument, which is you don't know. Like you have truly no idea. And having worked in the industry and seen all of the products and the wide array of people from, 5'2" and 90 pounds to 400 pounds and, 6'8", you can conceal just about anything if you have the right equipment and the expertise, and so it blows my mind that crime still happens, to be honest with you, with the saturation of firearms in the United States, like, because
Where
you
there
don't
are
know.
people, there will always be crime.
Oh, for sure.
You cannot.
I don't
abolish
disagree.
crime.
No, I'm not trying to say that we can't abolish crime, but like if I was sitting around and I was like, I'm gonna go break into someone's house, I just like the balls, like.
So, but that's a really important point. I'm glad you both said that. It almost ties into why people sometimes question. I don't know if I might be making a huge mistake in opening up a can of worms that I should not.
Bring it
But
on.
it reminds me and makes me think of when people say like America doesn't need to spend as much on their military. America doesn't need this gigantic military and all this stuff. I know it's turned into a hot take now. So maybe we don't need to spend $778 billion on an annual defense budget. However, if I would rather be number one militarily in the world or any other number, I'd rather be number one. Okay. Because there's always going to be someone out there that has the balls, that has the cojones to do it. Okay. Another country's always going to say, well, if there's no one strong enough to check me, then I may as well find out what I can get away with. Okay. I mean, we've seen it time and time again in history. If there's no one powerful enough to check another great power, then they're just going to keep taking and taking and taking until somebody steps up and says no. Same thing with people who want to commit crime. Okay. I wouldn't commit crime. You guys wouldn't commit crime. That is not stopping Joe Schmo from like coming home from work one day and he's like, dude, I did not get enough tips. I'm going to go rob my neighbor. Okay. So it doesn't, just because you're not going to do it doesn't mean he won't, which means
100%.
just because I don't think anybody's going to break into my house doesn't mean they're not, because someone's
Right.
always bold enough to try.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the whole mindset is, and for me, like when I really, I don't conceal, like I wasn't brought up in a super Second Amendment family. Like my families were okay with guns. Like they weren't like against them, but they weren't like, you need to do this, you need to have this, like for me, it was I sat down and I reasoned it out. I read things from both sides. Like, I actually, one of the guys at my wedding, I met on the opposing side of a gun control debate, whether or not gun rights should be what they are. And actually, Lark, if you're listening, so proud of you, buddy. You've gone from the most anti-gun person I've ever met to now being in the United States military and an avid gun owner. So shout out to you.
Talk
I
about
did that.
growth.
What?
I said, talk about growth. Talk about a real switcheroo, huh?
Dude, 100%. And I can go far into that. But, I came to the conclusion personally that bad things happen. I could live the most perfect, beneficial, like benevolent life and be, Mother Teresa in my community. And somebody having a bad day and a bad set of circumstances could come up to me and mug me, even if I had nothing on me. Like, even, there's so many situations. And from a personal responsibility standpoint, I may be in shape, but I don't know how to fight. It is what it is, and I hope in those situations that I can, do well enough to fend somebody off. But if I can carry a gun and train and know how to shoot and practice, I can be prepared for much more than I would be able to otherwise,
Right.
And for me, especially now married, like, if I'm out with my wife and, eventually my kids, like, I'm going to do everything I can to guarantee their safety.
It goes back to protecting what's yours.
Right, 100%.
I definitely think that if I had the choice to throw hands or get into a gunfight, I mean, I'm choosing to just get into a fight any day, any night, because no one has to die at that point. Like,
100%.
Even if you're carrying, using the weapon should not be option number one. Like, you should not carry.
No, 100%.
So that,
100%.
and they teach you that when you get your concealed and everything. I mean, they tell you, you are not carrying this so that if some dude bumps you and says, "Hey, watch it," you can be like, "Oh, what?" Like, no, it's always supposed to be fisticuffs first. Like, you
run first. Like, just
yeah.
My pride is not worth getting my ass beat. Like,
even if you're not, regardless of if you're going to win or not, sometimes you got to take those L's and other times you can take them. What I'm saying is you should always de-escalate. And if you cannot,
100%.
do not shoot them if they're not going to, if he just wants to take it outside and throw a couple punches, like, just go outside. You might get knocked down. Your pride might get hurt. Don't pull your gun, bro. You don't have to 100%. Shoot them. Like,
no, I mean,
and go home, like, see your mom next week. Like, you don't need to shoot everybody.
Well, and I agree with you 100%. Like, and this is where it gets almost touchy for me is I need to be really careful with what I say because, I have friends and peers very invested in the gun world. And they're like, they're going to give me some feedback, I'm sure. And they'll be like, you shouldn't have said this. But it's one of those things where absolutely, I do not ever want to shoot somebody. Like, that is the last thing that I would ever want to do. But I will do it to defend that which I love. But if there is any avenue where that option does not need to be taken, even if that means getting robbed, having things stolen from me, like,
then what's the point of owning a gun?
Wait, yeah. Hey, I don't know if I'm gonna let somebody steal something from me.
No. But here's the thing: is whatever they're about to steal from you worth ending their life? And furthermore, even if you are in your legal rights, willing and able to do, you can make arguments for both sides of this case. Like that, there's plenty of emotionally charged arguments about why guns should not be legal or why civilians should not be able to own them. But the bottom line of all of those arguments is who's going to end up with guns if that's the case? And that's going to be people that do not follow the law.
Well, if guns don't follow the law,
Right, 100%. But I'd rather have law-abiding citizens with guns than, disarmed law-abiding citizens and criminals with guns.
That I would agree with.
Like every day of the week. Like it's one of these things where you can't pass laws to reduce crime.
Say that again.
Can you pass a law to reduce crime?
You just set yourself. Yes, you can pass a law to stop white collar crime, to even stop some blue collar crime, dude. You could pass so many laws to stop crime.
Give me an
Not
example.
violent crime. You can't stop violent crime with laws.
Okay, and
The
I should have
law-
said that because that is the discerning factor. But
The law
Go ahead,
itself
Will.
is a deterrent and will stop some of the crime.
Yes.
okay, but the people that are going to commit a crime are not going to go and commit that crime and then moments before think, oh, wait, Virginia passed this law 2 years ago that said I can't steal cars.
But that's not who it's for.
Right.
It's for that person so that when they break the law, we can say they broke the law and then we can try them under it. It's really
For sure.
for those people who don't have the balls to do it, you know? They're like, yeah, I was like kind of thinking about, you know, shooting my neighbor, but Virginia just passed a law where you can't shoot your neighbor unless they're 3 doors down, dude. Shit. They're like, I'm not going to do it. Like the guy that was going to do it anyways, he's like, I'm going to get up tomorrow and shoot my neighbor. He was going to do it. But the guy who was like, oh, the law, I can't get away with it. Like they're not going to do it, you know?
I guess, and Will's right. I should have quantified violent crime. Like, you know, that was what my college debate was gun control's effects on violent crime. And the research shows very empirically the cities and the states with the strictest forms of civilian gun control have the highest and the worst, you know, amounts of gun violence.
Chicago,
Peoria, Detroit, California.
Hey, take it easy on Detroit, man.
Hey, I have much respect for Detroit. Detroit's really turning it around. Even though I have all the licensure and everything, like I can't do it. Why?
because Chicago is a political center.
Yeah.
It's like in the top 3 major cities of the United States, and the influence that the mayor has with Chicago, you know, Chicago is separate from the state of Illinois. Pritzker really doesn't have any jurisdiction there. I mean, he does technically, but that's Lightfoot's territory.
Nah, dude, it like, and if you actually look at a political orientation map of Illinois, hot take on my end, but socialism has failed in every country it's been tried.
Communism has failed.
Communism.
Jury's still out on socialism.
Vietnam, bro. It has worked in Vietnam. Not to take us there, but
I have a question for you guys.
Okay.
How do you feel about mandatory firearms training? Just like you would get your driver's license to drive a car, whether or not you actually get one, you'd still have to be trained to use it. And I have this question because you take people who were born around guns, started to use them from a very young age, very familiar, and are keenly aware of the safety risks that just firearms inherently possess. And then compare those to the 21-year-old who spent his entire life in Chicago, turns 21, and he's like, oh, I can buy a gun, and has absolutely no experience whatsoever. I feel like we could prevent a lot of firearm accidents by mandating people go through these firearm safety courses, whether or not they believe in the Second Amendment, whether or not they're going to buy a gun. What do you guys think?
Go ahead, Justin.
So,
if you're not fully formulated your argument, I'll go.
No, I am. I'm just deciding on how I want to. So, speaking from personal experience, I think of 2 very specific instances that could have been. Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
So I get very leery of the words mandated.
I chose that word on purpose. We would this would be enforced.
You will struggle to get me to agree that mandated firearms training is a benefit. Now, I would agree that firearms training for the population would be a massive benefit and would dispel a lot of the mystery around firearms and would greatly reduce the amount of firearm accidents and, you know, misfires and things like that. If you legally enforce it is where it gets difficult for me as a person that believes in, you know, freedom to choose and the rights to do or not participate in something. That aside, I am a humongous proponent, and every time that I helped or guided or, you know, taught someone how to use a gun or to buy a gun and helped, you know, pick something that was a good fit for them, I always told them, I'm like, hey, you are the equivalent of a grade schooler right now. Like you have a tool, and it can be used for good and it can be enjoyable, but you don't know enough about it to not understand that it's also dangerous. And so, I would always recommend and urge them to practice, to train, to go to classes, to take training, because it's important. And you can walk away from it better prepared for any situation that you encounter. It's not legally required in some of these places. Like, if you turn 18 in Texas, you can walk into a gun store, buy a gun, and walk home. I know people, like when COVID started, I mean, even before, like anytime something got rough, like we had people come in that were like, yeah, I bought this gun 35 years ago. I've never shot it. Can you teach me how to use it? And I'm like, you brought a loaded gun into this store, not in a case, and you threw it on the desk in front of me. Like, you broke multiple laws and just in doing this, and then you endangered everyone's life in this building. It's very difficult not to reach across and shake that person and be like, you stupid head. Like, you could have so many things could have gone wrong. But it's someone who was not given the training or did not take personal responsibility to get the training. And I'm going to bring it all back to my man, Jocko Willink. Extreme ownership. Responsibility, people. It's up to you. So, again, mandated? No. Firearms training for the population? Net positive.
Okay. What about you, Justin?
So I think of two specific experiences where people with firearms training would have had, maybe the scenarios would have gone differently. The first one being a kid who went to the high school that I did. He's 5 years older than me, I believe. Basically, when they were seniors, the one kid goes home, and the other kid in this story goes over to his house. They decide that they have beef. They go out on the front lawn and get into a fist fight. And the owner of the home, the kid who lives there, gets beat. Doesn't really like that. Goes back inside, grabs an AK, and shoots the other kid in the leg. And he has to do, a year and a half of physical therapy, all because he lost a fight. I think firearm training could have helped there because it maybe would have reminded this gentleman, maybe I should not shoot him because I lost a fight. This is what they say. We should just, no, it's not worth it. Second one is when I was living in Kalamazoo still, when I was at Western, a kid literally 4 houses down went out, bought a gun, thought it was the coolest thing ever, invited his girlfriend, had his roommates over, was waving it around, didn't really care that it was loaded, wanted to show everyone his gun, told his girlfriend to stand across the room, pointed it at her, and accidentally shot her in the chest and killed her. I was watching a movie in my living room with my girlfriend at the time. Cop cars start rolling up, ambulance rolls up, and it's all over the news how this kid just went out and bought a gun, had no idea how to use it, shot her in the chest because he didn't even realize that it was still loaded. Okay, so some training for him absolutely would have done him a solid. When you talk about mandatory firearms training, I don't think I'm on board with it. It kind of weirds me out, kind of strikes me as autocratic and just strange. I don't know. I don't like the idea of mandatory bringing our citizens in and having mandatory firearm training sessions and training everyone to use a gun. I think the unique thing about America is it's your right to own a gun, but it's also your right to not own a gun and literally not care about guns. Okay. And so I don't think everybody needs to know. I think it would help save the people who do want guns. It would probably help those people in situations that they don't necessarily understand or how to, deal with the firearm in the heat of the moment. But for random citizens who don't want to own guns and don't really feel the need to even talk about them, care about them, I don't think there's any point in forcing them because they're not really going to use that sort of thing.
I will say, and this is actually, I obviously Justin and I seem to be very on the same page with this. Firearm training, as far as just basic safety, and I want to make sure that just that differentiation is there, because there's a difference between learning training as far as physically using dry firing, taking sights, shooting training, and safety training.
Right.
Now, firearm safety training was actually part of the American school system for a good chunk of the 20th century.
Really?
Widespread. I mean, you can go and look this up, and like, you know, even in like the 1960s, like kids would drive to school with a shotgun in their truck. You know, like they were taught, like, you know, these are the basic rules of firearm safety, like in school, like, and not like everywhere. Like, you know, obviously schools and states have differences, but this was not uncommon.
Well, there was also not the uniquely American problem of school shootings.
There were schools.
We're gonna steer clear of that.
Right. We're gonna sidestep school shootings for a second here, but you know, when you have a widely, you know, understood several rules of gun safety, there are far less likely to be gun, accidents. And so I think it's an important thing where, like, yes, you have the right to or to not do this, but please, please, please don't be a misinformed gun owner. Don't be someone that goes out and buys a gun because they think that now that they have a gun, they're magically safe. You know, it doesn't work like that. If you're not trained on how to use a gun and you brandish a firearm in a situation, it's just like brandishing a knife if you don't know how to fight. Like, if I'm about to get into a fist fight and I whip out a switchblade, like, what's the chances that I don't get stabbed with that?
Yeah.
You know? So it's one of these things where, like, you're not John Wick because you bought a Glock. Like, it's just, you know, it's almost embarrassing how bad I was at shooting. Like, even though I grew up, I started shooting when I was 5. I did my first competition shoot at 20. Dude, I was horrible. Like, so bad. And I thought I was like, you know, I've been doing this for 15 years. I'll be good. It's not the same. And so, you know, I would always urge people, please practice. Just, you know, there's no substitution for time.
Just be mindful.
Well, I mean, what do you think, man? Mandatory firearms training.
Well, when Ben brought up the difference between safety training and firearms training, I feel like I should have clarified. I think that there should be training of some sort that is enforced. Whether or not it's, you know, you take grade schoolers and have them go through a tactical shooting range, I don't think that's not what I mean. But
could be pretty lit though.
We're putting the 4th graders in the kill house, dude. Just sending them.
But like, it would be the safety aspect, you know, like this is a gun. This is how it works. You know, these are the laws. This is how you avoid accidents, that sort of thing. Because like your example, Justin, that guy who bought a gun thought it was the coolest thing in the world. That's something that I brought up earlier. That's what we want to avoid, is people who have no idea what they're doing, want to show it off, and they're waving it around, and somebody's accidentally going to get shot. And in your example, they got killed, and it was the guy's girlfriend. I mean, that's just heartbreaking. And you know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, especially with this kind of thing. If that guy knew even just a little more, because I'm assuming he knew nothing, because he was pointing it at his girlfriend. You should never point a gun at somebody you don't want to shoot, by the way. That's just rule number one.
Pull a gun on someone you do not intend to kill or are not okay with killing, because if you're pointing it, you might. So, yeah.
Sends a pretty clear message. Anyway.
Could you, this is a total side note. Could you imagine the autocratic possibilities of an indoctrinated America of like gun training in their schools? Like, we already have the guns. Like, there's more guns than there are people in this country. Can you imagine if, like, over the course of like 10, 12 presidencies, basically they brainwashed the entire American population into like becoming soldiers?
That sounds extremely fascist. That does not sound like the America I want to be a part of. That sounds
well, 100% not. But could you imagine like 350 million armed and trained individuals?
Well, if America wasn't going to be invaded before, nobody would ever try and invade.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. Well, imagine global perception. I mean, if you look at World War II, and oh my gosh, what is this guy's name?
The Japanese general.
Yes, what is his name?
I know. I don't know his name.
Whatever his name is, but you know, he says mainland America can never be invaded because there's a rifle behind every blade of grass. Mm-hmm. Not only is he right, but I mean, yeah, I guess he's right. Like, that's what I'm trying to say.
Yamamoto. Yep, Admiral Yamamoto.
Yes, Yamamoto. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. So imagine the global perception of it's like, dang, like Americans really know how to use guns. Like, they're kind of scary. I don't know if they could ever be invaded. To like, yo, every American is a soldier, and I'm kind of scared of them. Like, it wouldn't be, there'd be no friendliness. I feel like there'd be no cordialness. Like it would be, everyone would be tiptoeing around the fact that like if America wanted to, there's
You could just
350 pissed off people that are just like, we're going to Saudi Arabia. Like, yeah, bro, I'll come. And then before you know it, there's just people like in droves lining up to,
100%. Well, and it's really one of the things about the Second Amendment that I like to bring up is, there's that example, and then there's even a Civil War example. Obviously, those time periods are not today.
Don't bring
do
it.
it.
Okay, wait, hang on. Are we talking about like the Civil War or the Boogaloo?
The United States 1860 to 1865 Civil War.
Okay.
There was an opportunity for a Confederate general to invade Ohio. Okay. And
You fumbled the bag then.
well, when asked by the Confederate leadership to invade Ohio, the general wrote back to the Confederate leadership and said, no. And they were like, why not? You have an army. And the reason was there were 800,000 people that year in Ohio that registered to squirrel hunt. And the thinking of this Confederate general was, if they can shoot a squirrel, they can shoot a man.
That's sound thinking.
Very sound thinking. And it points to this idea that, yeah, in modern society, I cannot take out a tank. But is there a deterrent when you look at the population of an area and assume if an invading force was to come and attempt to occupy this territory, and every single household has the capacity to resist and inflict casualties on our forces, you can't ignore that even in the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Even if you can dominate a battlefield with planes and with drones and with missiles, Vietnam painted a very bloody picture of what a determined resistance can do, even with incredibly lacking weapons.
You know what else painted a picture like that?
What you got, Justin?
I'm just saying, you know what else painted a picture like that?
What?
Afghanistan.
Dude.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I really, it's very interesting to me, and I think it's an American thing. We look at our histories and battles, and we look at like these horrifically bloody wars that we've been a part of.
Back to back.
We as Americans, I mean, we can get into like the Pacific Theater because there's some awesome examples there. Americans have never suffered the losses that other nations have in any recent major war.
Arguably, they play it up more, even though they lose less as well.
100%. Like if
our
you
sons and daughters are never coming home, and we drape the flag over the casket, and every single citizen is mourning the death of one man, and it truly
because the death of one American soldier is a big deal.
Yeah.
Because by and large, that does not happen. Well, I mean, of course it happens, but like it's, in Vietnam, it was like one American soldier for every like 10 or 20 enemy combatants. And Nixon was like, I don't get it. We're losing the war because of television. And then he had to have his advisors tell him, like, they don't care about the 20 dead enemies. They care about the one dead American, because it was that big of a deal.
Yeah. I mean, this is Google, so take it with a grain of salt. The low estimate for number of Northern Vietnamese that died during, the Vietnam War is 500,000 compared to 58,220 U.S. soldiers that died in the conflict.
Now, does that number include North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong?
So North Vietnamese, Viet Cong military, and civilian dead. So that is an important thing to add.
There's no way, dude. Not to be morbid like that, but there's no way only 500,000.
Well, and that's a very low estimate. Like the range goes.
What's the high estimate?
I clicked on the article. Hold on. Over 1.5 million.
Jesus.
So I would even wager to say it's higher than that.
Or we can meet in the middle and say 1 million.
I was going to say, yeah, land on that middle number.
We truly don't know. But the fact of the matter is, even at the low end, it's almost 10 to 1. But we consider it a military defeat on our part. If you go back to World War I or World War II, and you compare the number of American casualties, not just deaths, but just wartime casualties, to a place like Russia, it's not even comparable. Like the sacrifices, I don't want to downplay Americans' deaths, but we just don't have the skin in the game like some of these other countries have throughout, history.
Nobody has skin in the game like Russia.
They go hard in the paint.
I guess China
even against their own.
You could put China up there too. They've both been through it, but
that was it's just an interesting point. I'm looking up some stuff on Afghanistan just because I want to know. This is Wikipedia, so don't at me. 176,000 people in Afghanistan were killed, 46,000 civilians, 69,000 military and police, and 53,000 opposition. However, the death toll is probably higher. But I don't know. It gets to the point where sometimes firepower superiority really brings in these situations where 10-1, 20-1 casualties, especially during World War II. Like as we drew nearer to Japan, there were pilots that shot down 50, 60 planes, like semi-routinely. Like it was incredible, the difference in skill, the difference in ability. But also when you're fighting in these small islands and you have the island surrounded by battleships, lobbing artillery at them, planes strafing the ground, and artillery on the ground against a guy with a rifle, like he might never even see the enemy to engage them before dying.
Yeah, he might just disappear.
Right, like red
Death
mist
will come out of nowhere.
Never see it coming, dude. It's wild.
Well, we could easily take this conversation into the power of the Western Air Forces in the U.S. Navy.
I want to take it in a very controversial area.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it.
Hot
Here we
take.
go.
Will, buckle in.
All right, I'm ready.
All right,
Give it to me.
And this is an argument that I got into. I don't want to say I got into. Someone argued to me.
Did you pull your gun on?
No. For legal reasons, this is a joke. No, but they basically were like, the Second Amendment's the dumbest thing ever. Like you can't, and this was actually an ISU professor, by the way, but they were like, you can't beat, Black Hawk helicopters and military jets, F-16s or whatever they're flying. I don't know.
Boy, oh boy, did that hold up?
But basically, if you go back to the January riots in the Capitol and you see these people storm the Capitol, take over these buildings, no firearms were involved in this entire incident that I'm aware of. There may have been one. Go ahead. You got something?
Okay. I'm so glad you said that because this is actually one portion of the January 6th saga that I feel like fairly strongly about is there was one shooting and one death. Ashley Babbitt, who attempted to climb through a barricaded glass door into the House chambers, was shot by Secret Service and killed. And conservatives, let me rescind that. Not conservatives, because not all conservatives agree with this. Participators in the insurrection were all like, Ashley Babbitt was martyred. Like they shot her. She wasn't doing anything wrong. And, in my eyes, dude, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. You're lucky you didn't get shot too. You broke into the nation's capital, put it on lockdown, did not express your intentions, left that extremely ambiguous, put the leaders of our nation in danger, and then got shot and died, and you said you did nothing wrong? Like
no, and I'm not going to wade into whether or not that was treason or anything like that. The reason I bring this up for this argument is if a group of unarmed individuals, according to some people's interpretations of these events, almost overthrew the American government, could you imagine if every single person had an AR-15?
There would have been a gun battle in the Capitol.
Yeah, there would have been a way different response.
Right. But if unarmed, they were almost able to inflict, at the very least, a massive disruption of American government actions. I think it really disarms the argument that the Second Amendment does not, have a place in 21st century society. and especially when you get into urban centers, even if, military planes were targeting targets in cities, you can't discriminate between friendly and non-friendly combatants. And this is something that Afghanistan taught us very clearly, is like, even with high level drone strikes or whatever they use, like the amount of civilian and, casualties was unacceptable. I don't have any other way to say it other than unacceptable. Like, and again, I don't want to get political about it. There are things that both sides of the parties have done that I disagree with. It's one of these things where you can't play, oh, well, only the bad people are going to get hurt. Like, that's not the reality of war, and that's never been the reality of war.
That is a fact. In World War II, there were more civilian casualties than military casualties.
100%. It's not even like it's absolutely ridiculous. But I wanted to bring that up because I wanted to hear your thoughts. Like, obviously, we've actually kind of gone into this a little bit in previous episodes, and partially in our dialogue thus far, I think we've kind of given an answer to this. But I truly still believe the Second Amendment is a benefit to the American people on the grounds of potentially keeping the government in check, but also guaranteeing personal sovereignty.
Mm-hmm. I think the Second Amendment is crucial to the American identity, and proving that we can continue to run things the way that we want them without making any major changes is an important aspect to who we are today.
100%.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think it's interesting what you said, Ben. It's just because, you say, had they shown up with AR-15s, I guess what I'm saying is they were able to cause such disruption with no firearms. And I think what's ironic in my eyes is that had they shown up with firearms, they would have caused less disruption. I'm not saying that they personally would have done less, but I'm saying that had every single person showed up armed in Kevlar and with an AR-15 and a couple loaded magazines, I would at least hope that the federal government would take that a lot more serious, deploy and shut down that situation, maybe before they even made it inside the Capitol.
Define shut down.
Like, shut down that situation. So, I mean, if they're trying to break in, they have firearms, they're not just deploying, DC police officers. Like, we're sending in the National Guard that's not being held back, mind you. And if we need to send in any kind of military personnel in DC, we are, because now there's not just an angry mob outside the Capitol, there's an armed one. So they're not even going to allow that to escalate into the type of situation that it did when they were unarmed, is what I'm saying. Sure. I would hope.
Do you think that if an armed mob showed up outside of the Capitol, that they would be met with lethal resistance from the government?
If they engaged in hostile actions, I guess. Like, because you can't shoot unarmed civilians. So if you're going to break into the Capitol,
you can actually shoot unarmed civilians. Okay. It happens all over the world. All the time.
You can.
The only notable exception is America, because not all of us are. Hot take number 2.
Oh, dude, I could give the hottest take of the night about shooting unarmed civilians, but I'm going to slide past that one.
Cowards.
That is not what this podcast is about right now. But yeah, I mean, I think
put it in the chat. I want to know.
Yeah, put it in the chat. Let's see it.
While he's writing, I want to take another hot take. All right, so we're gonna sidestep potentially Justin's. I don't know exactly what his is gonna be. Let's talk about Kyle Rittenhouse.
Ooh, okay.
We are not going.
Yeah, we're not talking about that.
We are, and how can I put this? Unqualified.
I told you. It was the hottest.
Yeah, we are going to.
So, on the topic that Justin brought up, let's talk about Kyle Rittenhouse.
How would we even go about talking about that? Like,
what I want to talk about is the narrative separation between the factual events of the Rittenhouse case and the response at the social media level, the media level, and the national government level. All right. And obviously this is now resolved. The trial has fulfilled itself and Kyle was acquitted. But at the time, Kyle was on trial for, shooting people. But he did it in a way where, the argument for self-defense could be made. And, I don't want to paint a picture that it was not. Like, you could make a very compelling argument that Kyle had no business being there. You also apparently can make a very good argument that he should have been there and was within his legal rights as an American to do what he did. And I think if you actually paid attention and, looked at it objectively, I think what he did was totally fine. But the media response to this was very polarizing.
As is with most situations in America.
And I think this was special, though, because this had a level of racial tension that I don't know that it truly deserved. Would you agree with that?
It was definitely
this is a hot take, by the way. So,
of what was going on, but I think the Second Amendment and gun rights had the spotlight with the Kyle Rittenhouse case.
Yeah,
I think because Kyle Rittenhouse still would have gone to trial if everybody that he shot were white.
Everybody that he shot was white.
We'll cut that part.
But I think what Ben is saying is so. At least in my eyes, my personal opinion here, and I think some Americans might find themselves in the same boat as me, but you need to separate your feelings from the verdict of the case and the events of the case and what actually happened. Okay. And just stick to the facts. What happened was he was proven innocent, or they found him innocent, that he acted in self-defense. Okay. And obviously whether that's down to he truly acted in self-defense or the defense team had a better argument, whatever it is, he was found to have shot those 3 individuals in self-defense. Okay. For me, I think it's okay to shoot or, if you need to kill another individual, if it's in self-defense, if they are threatening you. But also for me, I think it's idiotic that he was there in the first place. There was no need for a 17-year-old kid to be walking around with a loaded AR-17, providing medical assistance or defending property. You just go home, bro. Go home. You don't need to shoot anybody. You wouldn't show up unless you were looking for trouble. But that's my opinion, okay? And he showed up anyways, and he shot 3 people in self-defense. So do I think he needed to be there? Absolutely not. I actually think it was idiotic of him to be there. But he was, and he did what he did. And so, that's just kind of – I think the racial part comes in because this was happening at the same time as Breonna Taylor's case, where the boyfriend was, going to trial for shooting back at police who illegally no-knocked his apartment. And they were like, what the fuck? This kid walks in the street and shoots 3 people, and this guy defends his own home, and, he's going to trial? What's up with this? But this kid's, so I think that's where the lines were being drawn. But in terms of feelings, no, dude, he shouldn't have been there. Facts, he acted in self-defense. That's all there is to it.
So I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to say what I was going to say.
Kyle Rittenhouse was within his rights to be in Wisconsin at that night. He was within his rights to carry the weapon that he had as provided by the loophole. And if you saw the video of the shooting, you could easily see that it was self-defense. He ran first, and once he was clobbered and he fell down, it appeared that he fired a warning shot in the air. Whether or not it was a warning shot or a misfire is unclear, but his rifle discharged, aimed up in the sky. And then they continued to assail him, and then that's when he shot the people that were chasing him. So he was within his rights to defend himself. He was within his rights to be there. He was within his rights to carry a gun. Should he have been there? Probably not. But shoulda, coulda, woulda. Facts are, he was acquitted. He's innocent.
Now, what I'm going to say is difficult for me to navigate. Justin, I hear what you said, and I also hear what you said. And what I want to do is basically just how closely did you actually follow it?
Cases it was going on?
Mm-hmm. Did you follow it closely, or?
Yes.
I read the major news headlines as they appeared in my feed.
Okay. So I feel like that's what most of us did. I actually did a little bit more digging, and again, perhaps intrinsic biases came into play where maybe I wasn't being the most objective. From my perspective, you can make the argument, absolutely, like, what was a 17-year-old kid doing there? But if you actually listen to his testimony and look on a map of where he lived and where he worked, his friends and family were in Kenosha. He worked in Kenosha. He lived, across state lines, but less than 15 minutes from there. So, he was in an area where those that he loved, that which he worked at and, found value in, was at risk. And he went there, to defend that, but also not, he clearly didn't go there with the intention of just shooting people. Why would he have run? Why would he have tried to help people do it? Again, it may not be important, but he stopped a gas station from being caught on fire. Like, people were burnt, like rolling flaming barrels into gas stations, and he stopped that. Like, that may not be super pertinent to the case of whether or not he did what he did, but why would he do that if he went there with nefarious intent? The argument can be made. Regardless, why I want this to be thought about is, the people that he shot were not people of color, and they were not what I would consider to be benevolent U.S. citizens. And so for me, it comes down to, like, what do you consider the gathering of people at Kenosha in that time? Okay, because is it a mob? Is it a riot? Is it a protest? Like, what is the definition and why? Because I think that's super important, because we are given the right by the Constitution, same as the right to bear arms, to peaceably assemble and protest.
That protest, using air quotes here, was not peaceful. They were closer to looters and rioters than peaceful demonstrators.
I got a hot take.
Go ahead.
That whole 2020 year of protesting, I participated in too myself. So, I mean, I can speak from experience, but from everything, I followed all of that extremely closely, felt very passionate about it. In most of those scenarios, I cannot speak for Kenosha specifically because I don't know. I do know that in Kenosha, there were some, like, bad actors, like people who made it look like members on the left or people who were protesting, racial injustice were doing bad things when it really wasn't necessarily them, like breaking windows, like just going out and breaking windows so that it would look like, protesters were breaking windows or committing acts of arson. But my hot take is a lot of these peaceful protests that turned violent or escalated were escalated by the police first, not by the protesters. The police came out, used excessive force, tear gassed peaceful protesters, rubber bullets, rather than even using rubber bullets in the intended, method, like bouncing it off sidewalks or shooting it near people, just shooting them directly, pushing them with riot shields, coming in with horse cops. They escalated that. So I would think, yes, it was peaceful until it was escalated.
Okay. That may well be the case. For me, the purpose of the the purpose of the protest was to protest racial discrimination. It's to further the Black Lives Matter movement.
Right.
What good were some of these individuals that Kyle ended up engaging with and killing doing in this situation? When you have a multi-time convicted pedophile armed with a firearm that he has illegally, who got out of jail or court, 6 days prior and traveled most of the state to be at this gathering, like, are you there to support racial and, equality, or are you there with nefarious intent? It's one of these questions where, again, it was a very socially charged issue to the point where I feel like our opinions on whether or not the movement as a whole was acceptable became more important than actually looking at nobody was involved that wasn't white, and the people that were shot were not great people. Now, I'm not saying that you deserve to get shot because you're a bad person, though hot take, pedophiles do deserve to get shot. I might edit that out. I don't know if I want to go that far, but it's one of these things. You know, it's just a difficult situation to be in. But again, yeah, he was acquitted. Breonna Taylor's husband was acquitted. Those guys in Georgia, Alabama were not acquitted. They are going to jail.
Hey, but the thing is, though, I think Rittenhouse, I think justice was served. It was self-defense. I think in the case of Kenneth Taylor, I believe Kenneth, I don't know if they were married.
Yeah.
I think justice was served there. That man deserved to be acquitted. Okay. In the Ahmaud Arbery case with those individuals, justice was also served. They deserved to be convicted.
100%.
Okay. So I think it was the correct verdict across the board for those 3 cases.
100%.
I agree. So where do we take the conversation from here? We started with the Second Amendment, then we went to Kyle Rittenhouse.
Let's bring it back.
All right. I'm a big believer that select firearms should be accessible to American citizens.
Can you define that for our audience?
For those not with the firearms vernacular, that means full auto.
I would agree. We should have the option to purchase fully automatic assault weapons.
Under a Class 3. What is that, an FFL, right? They call that?
So an FFL is just a firearms dealer license.
Okay.
For a Class 3, you actually need a Class 3 license. Not every state, to my understanding, requires a Class 3. Illinois does, but you also need a Class 7 dealer license to make and manufacture select fire rifles in Illinois. Where it gets interesting is U.S. citizens legally can get select firearms as long as they were manufactured before 1986. I think that's stupid. I think we should be able to get the new stuff.
So what am I going to go do? Go find an M60 at auction and?
Well, yeah. So I mean, what you do is when you go on these sites and look at these things, you see an M16 lower from Vietnam selling for $80,000, even though it's had 500,000 rounds go through it because it was manufactured pre-1986. It's stupid.
Oh, I don't know about you guys, but I'd like to have an authentic MP40. I think that would just be cool.
My girlfriend's father owns an authentic STG 44.
Let's go.
Wanted to shoot for a long time. Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, I would like to own an automatic firearm, but it's almost like an internal battle of values for me because the only reason I would want to own those, much like the only reason anyone else would want to own those, is strictly from what you mentioned earlier, Will, just a complete fun standpoint.
Yeah.
Like taking them to the range. Like, you do not buy an AR for home defense, okay? If someone breaks in, you're not, like, taking it, okay, a fully auto. For home defense, you got 10
It's my preferred home defense weapon would be a dog, an attack dog, or a shotgun. But that's a different.
Put the two together.
What I'm saying
there you go. But yeah,
you buy it for fun.
I do agree.
Okay? You buy it for fun. So I feel like I would only own it simply because I want to take it to the shooting range. But then again, do I really feel like somebody needs to own that sort of thing? Is it frivolous? Like, are we just putting them out there? So it's like this battle of like.
The way that I see it, like automatic weapons, especially like the antiques, like MP40s and STGs, they're like jet skis and ATVs. Yes, they're dangerous in the wrong hands, especially if you don't know how to use them. You should probably have them insured, and if you grew up around them, you're going to know what you're doing and all that. But I'll use the word toys very hesitantly here, but they're fun. The only reason that you would like have an automatic weapon is because you like guns. And if you, like Justin said, you take it to the shooting range, you have your fun, you blow off a couple thousand rounds with their buddies, and you have a good day.
A couple thousand rounds?
If all of you have automatic
this guy just hit the best lottery ticket of his life. Oh my God.
Especially right now.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to me, the argument about frivolity is interesting because, then you could get into like, well, what about like 1,000 horsepower cars? Like the speed limit's 70, 80 at tops in America,
Yeah,
like
you're right.
what you need the rest of that speedometer for. Like,
You're right.
the
The track.
Right. You know, it's one of those things.
Argument.
But
That's
I
the
think
argument.
right. But I think it's that American idea that like we have the rights to have it. It's been restricted. The arguments and reasoning why it was restricted is pretty stupid if you actually read the NFA Act of 1986. But it's just one of those things, you know, like states have more different restrictions than the federal government, like magazine capacity bans, stuff like that. What I would say is, you know, even those that are tactically proficient with a semi-automatic rifle, select fire rifles, if you do not have the ammo and like the training to use it, are less effective than semi-automatic rifles. You know, I've shot select fire rifles and they're awesome. It's a good time, especially when somebody else is paying for me to shoot it. You know, if you're not the U.S. Army or another military, you're not going to have 30 magazines on your person that you can blow through ammo and not have to pay for. You know, like it's not a beneficial situation. You're going to be much more accurate. You're going to be able to do far more precise maneuvers, not select fire. Select fire is to lay down covering fire or to, you know, to engage multiple people in rapid succession. From a civilian perspective, it's highly unlikely you're going to run into a room full of Nazi sympathizers, you know, like whatever, like that you need to go and deal with, you know, it's not the same ballgame. And so again, I used to work at a very high-end custom gun store, and we specialized in self-defense, and like we did all sorts of cool stuff. We had doctors and neurosurgeons come in and literally spend like $40,000 in an afternoon, like night vision, like all this crazy stuff. And it's like, oh, this is all super cool. The chances of you using this legally is dubious.
Right.
You know, like anytime someone's like, well, I need a 308 rifle to reach out to 800 yards in case I need to defend myself. And I'm like,
Do you?
800 yards defense.
Right.
These are not.
I need a pinata stuffed with tannerite as well. So
Tannerite's legal, bro. I'm all for it.
I know tannerite is legal, but
bro, thermite's where it's at, dude. That stuff is crazy. But it's I don't know. There's so much cool stuff out there. Like what I will say, AR pistols are awesome for home defense. Okay. And like personally, I have an AR for home defense. It's a 300 blackout. But so there you go. I have at least one firearm confirmed.
Of all the ARs you could have for home defense, that arguably makes the most sense because for the 300 blackout, you're not going to use that at long range anyways, being that it's subsonic. So if you're using it in the confines of your own apartment, I guess we're gonna on that one.
Well, and again, it comes back to I would rather be more prepared than necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I have, you know, I'm gonna stop there because
it's a long road to go down.
Don't come into my apartment. I'm welcome. But it's one of these things, like, you know, like over the last 2 years, I've had to sit down with my wife and, you know, even before she was my wife and be like, hey, like, I hope we never have to do anything with this. And I truly don't consider myself like a doomsday prep or anything like that. But I was like, hey, like, real talk, if shit hits the fan, like, what is our plan? Because if you don't have a plan, everything's going to go wrong. And so heaven forbid, like our apartment burns down or, you know, something happens. Like, what are you going to do? Like, these are not fun conversations to have. Like, you never want to sit down with your loved ones and be like, all right, like, hey, like every day there are dangers, you know, outside of us that we have no control over. Are we going to, you know, take that in stride, or are we going to plan ahead and have a plan for that? And so like, we've had to come up with like, hey, like if there's a natural disaster, like what are we going to do? Like anything, like having these conversations is important because it gives you a framework to, you know, like I got walkie talkies. This was actually on my wedding registry. But it's one of those things like, hey, like these things last batteries forever. They have awesome range, even if there's no, you know, wireless connection, you know, through phones or whatever, like we can communicate. there's value there. Like, I hope I never have to use that for anything, but it's better to have it and not need it than the other way around, personally.
Right.
Absolutely.
I got another interesting area we could go. People who say that's the police's job. Is this covered under the Second Amendment? This is where it gets dubious, because this is where like gun control arguments go, is like outside of Second Amendment true definition.
Are you talking about like citizens arrest and all that?
Citizens arrest is stupid. Don't do that.
Yeah, please do not try to make a citizen's arrest.
You are asking for trouble, and if you're trying to make a citizen's arrest, you probably don't know how to throw hands. So, but no, for me, like one of the things that I heard a lot, and I have a lot of friends that are in law enforcement, people will say, well, why do I need a gun when the police exist? Or, you know, like if there's a crime, I'll just call the police. And it's one of these things where you are now taking your freedom, your security, your safety, and putting it in the hands of someone else. Personally, I'm not comfortable with that. Like, I respect the police. I think the police is a force for good. There is definitely room for an improvement on the actions of the U.S. police as a whole. But I think to put all of my faith, all my trust, and my security solely in the hands of the police is possibly the stupidest argument I've ever heard.
I think it's lazy.
There's so many problems with America, and that's one of them for sure. But it's the reality where people have this mindset of like, oh, well, like the police will come. Maybe.
And will they get there in time?
No.
Right.
You know, the average response, and this might be an old statistic, but it's like 9 minutes. 9 minutes? I know people that can't have sex for 9 minutes. Okay, and you laugh, but like think about how long 9 minutes is.
Well, right, at this point, he's broken in, he shot you, and he shot your wife, and he shot your dog, and he took all your watches, and he opened your safe, and then he left. And then the police showed up. And they were like, oh,
right.
Man, look at this horrible crime that was committed. Whereas if you took it into your own hands, you made yourself the first line of defense. You know, that's when you talk about giving up your freedoms, Ben, and your liberties, it is not fitting for me to simply say like, yeah, like the police will be here to protect me, because it's the police's job to protect me. But who's to say that they're going to be here to protect me when I need them to be? Okay. So if you can't protect yourself, or you can't protect the things that you love, what are you doing? If you can't fight for your own home or your wife or your children, then what are you fighting for?
Apparently nothing.
Yeah.
I mean,
I feel like the people who say that believe heavily in like the deterrent that police presence has.
I think it's very naive. Go ahead, Will. I did not mean to interrupt you. I apologize.
Well, yeah, that's kind of what I was just saying, is like there will always be people that will ignore deterrent. And like when deterrent fails, what happens next?
Well,
that's
ask
exactly
JFK.
what I talked about the countries. You know, there's always a country willing to do it. There's always somebody willing to break the law. Like, if you're naive enough to think like it can't happen to me, chances are, bro, if it happens to you, you're in big trouble.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I always do my best to recommend, and again, anybody that's listening to this, if you want to learn about guns, or if you want to learn about safety or responsibility, like any of this, one of the best sources I've ever seen is a guy named Paul Harrell on YouTube. I cannot recommend him enough. He spent 20 plus years in the U.S. Marines. He was a firearms instructor. He taught special forces. He then got out and went into the civilian life, and he's actually a dental hygienist now, which is totally a different lifestyle. But he does training, firearm training, and he has a YouTube channel. And he has been involved in civilian shootings where, people attempted to take from him his life and the life of those around him, and he defended himself. He's one of the only individuals where that's happened to. that has gone on to say, like, hey, as an expert in this field, you know, even though I did everything right and I, did everything right, he still was arrested. He still went to court. There was still the possibility of him losing everything. Know what he knows and aren't trained to the extent, like, ignorance is not an excuse. Ignorance of the law does not grant you amnesty from its consequences. So it's one of these things where if you want to learn anything, please check him out. He has videos from as boring as ballistics of 9mm rounds to why was the Miami-Dade shooting relevant and how did that change law enforcement? Which, by the way, the Miami-Dade shooting is a super interesting case study.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of these things where the readiness of the American people to give up their responsibility to be lazy is worrisome to me. And I truly, like, when you said the people are being lazy, like, dude, it's a problem. And we're in our relative infancy of these people being this lazy. But I fear it has really bad consequences coming.
I don't disagree.
Me either, man.
There we go. No. But no, I mean, it's, again, I am not the most, like, hardcore, like, you got to be on your game 110%, but, like, man, like, the quickness and the readiness of those that I grew up with to just toss in the towel and say, oh, well, that's just the circumstances of my life, or that's just the way it is, or, like, just their willingness to accept it scares me. Like, I know so many people that would rather just be like, oh, well, this will be taken care of for me, even if I have to pay for it, or if I have to do this, or.
This is a rabbit hole.
It is. I'm gonna say, man, don't do it.
There was, we all listened to Dan Carlin, and he had a line about this, where government is like fire. Without government, you will succumb to the elements and you'll die, freeze to death, what have you. But if there's too much fire, it will destroy everything, which is why government needs to be controlled. A controlled fire will save your life, and it'll provide food, warmth, and all that. So I could make the argument that some reliance on the state is necessary. And I will make that argument.
For sure. I'm with you, Will. I like big government, honestly. But that being said,
Justin, you need to get out now.
I just think that
in this country, we're free to believe what we want.
Yeah, there's more things.
Not on this podcast.
Who's the fascist now?
Right.
I'll take responsibility.
It's my right.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should save this for another video on what government is to us and how relevant it is in today's world.
I think that
and how much it's changed.
Great video.
Teaser, next episode.